When people hear the name Eddie Stobart, they think of clean green and red trucks driving across Britain, proud drivers, and a company that became famous without selling anything to the public. But that image is only the surface. Behind the shiny trucks is a story of big risks, hard choices, quiet collapse, strong loyalty, and survival that most people never knew about. Here are 11 truths that completely change how the Eddie Stobart story is understood. Truth number 1. Eddie Stobart was a real man, not a brand creation. The name was not invented by marketers. Edward Stobart was a real haulier from Cumbria who founded the business in the 1950s with a single truck. In its earliest years, the company had no ambition to become famous. It was a practical operation built on moving goods efficiently across northern England. The brand identity came later, shaped by the discipline Eddie demanded. Vehicles had to be clean, drivers had to be professional, reliability mattered more than scale. Those principles stayed embedded long after Eddie stepped away, even as the company grew into a national operation. Truth number 2. The famous truck names were never a marketing gimmick. Every Eddie Stobart truck carries a woman's name. Many assume this was a branding trick. It wasn't. The practice began as a personal tradition and evolved into a cultural signature. Drivers named trucks after family members, partners, daughters, or loved ones. The company formalized it only after drivers became emotionally attached to their vehicles. This created something rare in logistics: personal pride. Drivers didn't just operate a fleet vehicle, they cared for a named truck that reflected directly on them. That emotional bond played a major role in why the fleet maintained such a high standard compared to competitors. Truth number 3. Eddie Stobart accidentally created a fan culture. No one planned for thousands of people to stand on motorway bridges taking photos of trucks. But that is exactly what happened. Spotters began recording truck names, fleet numbers, routes, and sightings. What started as a niche hobby turned into a national phenomenon. The Eddie Stobart fan club eventually became one of the largest transport fan communities in Europe. The company never sold merchandise at first. Fans made their own. This organic obsession transformed a logistics firm into a cultural symbol, something almost unheard of in heavy transport. Truth number 4. Clean trucks were a business strategy, not vanity. Eddie Stobart vehicles were famously spotless. This was not about looks, it was about psychology. Clean trucks signaled discipline. They suggested reliability to customers and professionalism to regulators. In a competitive industry where margins are thin, perception matters. Retail giants trusted Eddie Stobart with time-critical deliveries, partly because the fleet projected control and consistency. Cleanliness became shorthand for operational standards. The trucks were advertisements that moved. This approach also shaped internal behavior. Drivers understood that presentation was non-negotiable. A clean vehicle reflected pride in the job and respect for the company name printed across the trailer. Standards were visible and therefore enforceable. When a truck rolled into a distribution center looking sharp, it communicated order before a single word was spoken. That mattered in negotiations, inspections, and long-term contracts. The brand did not rely on slogans alone. It relied on repetition and visibility, day after day, mile after mile. Truth number 5. The company nearly lost its identity during rapid expansion. As Eddie Stobart grew, it diversified aggressively. Road haulage expanded into rail, ports, biomass, and logistics infrastructure. At one point, the company operated one of the largest rail freight divisions in the United Kingdom. But expansion came at a cost. Decision-making became fragmented. Financial complexity increased. The culture that once centered on drivers and discipline became diluted by corporate layers. Growth outpaced cohesion. This period planted the seeds for future instability. The original clarity of purpose became harder to maintain. Different divisions operated under different incentives. Short-term growth targets sometimes replaced long-term operational discipline. What once felt like a tightly run transport firm began to resemble a collection of loosely connected businesses. The brand stayed unified, but the internal mechanics did not always match that image. Truth number 6. The brand was stronger than the balance sheet. By the late 2010s, Eddie Stobart Group was facing serious financial trouble. Despite having one of the most recognizable names in British transport, the company struggled with debt, restructuring, and operational pressure. In 2019, Eddie Stobart Group narrowly avoided collapse after emergency investment and refinancing. For many observers, the shock was not that the company was in trouble, but that a brand so powerful could still fail financially. It proved a harsh reality. Reputation does not guarantee resilience. Customers still recognized the trucks. Fans still followed movements online. But brand loyalty could not offset cash flow problems, rising costs, and complex debt structures. The crisis exposed a fundamental truth of modern logistics. Visibility builds trust, but sustainability depends on fundamentals. When those fundamentals weaken, even the most iconic name can be pushed to the edge. Truth number 7. Drivers were not just employees, they were the brand. Unlike most logistics companies, Eddie Stobart drivers were highly visible. Their professionalism shaped public perception more than executives ever did. Many drivers stayed with the company for decades, even during periods of uncertainty. That loyalty was not accidental. Drivers were trained to exacting standards. Appearance, behavior, and punctuality were enforced long before such practices became common. In return, drivers gained prestige. Being an Eddie Stobart driver meant something. When financial instability hit, the emotional toll on the workforce was immense. They were watching a part of their identity wobble. Truth number 8. The company's collapse was quiet, not dramatic. When Eddie Stobart restructured, there was no single day that marked the end. No bankruptcy headline that froze the fleet overnight. No sudden clearing of depots. The trucks kept moving. Loads were still delivered. To the public eye, very little appeared to change. But internally, the company was shrinking in slow motion. Assets were sold piece by piece. Routes that once symbolized national reach were quietly handed off or absorbed by competitors. Regional depots were consolidated. Layers of management disappeared. Rail operations, once promoted as the future of the brand, were divested entirely. Each move made sense on paper. Together, they told a different story. This type of collapse is harder to process than a sudden failure. There is no clear ending. Employees continue showing up while knowing something fundamental has shifted. Fans keep spotting trucks while sensing that the momentum is gone. The brand is still present, but thinner, quieter, less ambitious. For long-time observers, it felt like erosion, not a crash, but a retreat. Eddie Stobart did not fall from the cliff. It walked backward, one step at a time, until it no longer stood where it once did. Truth. Number 9. The brand survived because someone bought the name. In 2021, Cleanliness Group acquired the Eddie Stobart logistics operations. On the surface, it looked like a rescue. And in many ways it was. Without that acquisition, the brand may not have survived at all. But survival came with a trade-off. Under new ownership, Eddie Stobart ceased to be an independent decision-maker. It became a strategic asset inside a much larger food distribution network. The trucks remained on the road. The green and red livery stayed intact. The naming tradition continued. To most people, it looked like continuity. Behind the scenes, the priorities changed. Decisions were no longer driven by brand identity or legacy. They were driven by integration, efficiency, and alignment with Cleanliness's wider logistics goals. Eddie Stobart no longer existed to be Eddie Stobart. It existed to support a system. The brand endured not because it was financially strong, but because it was emotionally valuable. That distinction matters. It explains why the name still exists, yet feels different. Truth number 10. Eddie Stobart is no longer what it once was today. Eddie Stobart still operates on UK roads. Its trucks are still visible on motorways, at distribution centres, and outside supermarkets. but the role it plays in the industry has changed. It no longer sets the tone for British haulage. It no longer expands aggressively. It no longer experiments at scale. Growth is measured. Risk is controlled. Strategy overrides sentiment. This is not failure. It is evolution shaped by necessity. For fans, the shift is bittersweet. The brand still sparks recognition. People still smile when they see a familiar name on a cab. But the sense of Eddie Stobart as a cultural force, a company that felt larger than logistics, has faded. What remains is a respected operation with a historic name, not the powerhouse that once dominated conversations, but a reminder of what once was. Truth number 11. Eddie Stobart changed how Britain sees trucking. This may be the most lasting truth of all. Before Eddie Stobart, trucking was invisible. Lorries were functional objects, drivers were anonymous. Logistics happened in the background, unnoticed, unless something went wrong. Eddie Stobart changed that. It gave trucks names. It gave drivers pride. It gave the public something to recognize and remember. People waved from bridges. Children learned fleet numbers. Adults debated sightings like sports statistics. The company humanized an industry built on steel, diesel, and deadlines. It proved that discipline and presentation could transform perception. That, even in a tough, margin-driven business, identity mattered. Even diminished, that influence remains. Other fleets adopted cleaner standards. Driver professionalism became a selling point. Branding entered an industry that once rejected it entirely. Eddie Stobart may no longer dominate British logistics, but it permanently altered how Britain looks at the road, the truck, and the person behind the wheel. And that impact cannot be sold, restructured, or erased. Eddie Stobart was never just about moving goods. It was about control, identity, and pride in a profession often ignored. The brand rose without advertising, survived financial collapse, and continues under new ownership because it meant something to people far beyond the balance sheet. Most companies disappear quietly. Eddie Stobart refuses to, and that may be its most shocking truth of all.